tragic comedy known as Russiagate is slowly becoming part of history. The resistance continues to resist Trump, but clearly the president has the wind at his back. Now is a time for a great awakening. What are the lessons to be learned? And can the liberal media recover from this fiasco? Cross-talking Russiagate, I'm joined by my guest, Ben Swann in Atlanta. He's an investigative journalist and founder of the Truth in Media Project. In New York, we have Rob Taub. He is a Newsmax columnist and contributor. And in Chattanooga, we cross to Anthony Brian Logan. He is a conservative political commentator. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. Yeah, that means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Rob, you're a Democrat in good standing, and you're a guest on this program in good standing. My first question to you is extremely simple. Has anybody learned anything through this fiasco? And I'm kind of looking at your end of the political spectrum right now. Go ahead, Rob.
Now, I'm like the team, the Washington Generals. They play the Harlem Globetrotters every game, and they've never won in like 60 years or however long the Trotters have existed, because I'm always on conservative programs. So I'm already a broken man. But I've been hearkening since this started to O.J. Simpson. I believe he was found innocent in a court of law. That doesn't necessarily mean that he was and is. I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, that's probably one of the best dodges in the history of this program, and that's about 10 years running now here. Basically, the same question to you, Ben, in Atlanta here, because I think it really begs that there has to be some kind of learning process here, because we certainly don't want to go through this again, because institutions have been eroded, trust in government, and particularly the trust in the media. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I think the media is, for me at least, is the biggest issue as a journalist. Look, politicians are expected to be dishonest because they're in this game of win or lose, right, by any means necessary. But the media is not supposed to be a part of that game. It's not supposed to be taking part in this sport of picking the side that you're going to be on. And unfortunately, this particular case has turned into maybe one of the worst examples in modern history of media not just overstepping, but working diligently. Yeah. Not as investigators, not as journalists, but as partisan hacks who have perpetrated a huge hoax that some of us have called a hoax for a very long time. I disagree with the connotation of O.J. Simpson and tying it to O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson was found not guilty by a jury during a trial period. In this case, a charge wasn't even brought. You couldn't even get it to that extent. So to compare those two, and I've seen that comparison in media quite a bit lately, I don't think is a fair comparison at all.
Yeah, but I don't even know what the crime was. That's even worse. I mean, at least in the O.J. case, there was some dead bodies, okay? Let's go
There's a charge, at least.
Right, and let's go to Anthony now. What is MSNBC and CNN going to do now? Because for the last 2.5 years, they've trained their audience to accept bombshell, closing in, Trump is done. I mean, over and over and over again. I mean, for me, it was just, almost, it was comedy at its worst. And even late night TV programs now, the comedy programs, aren't funny here. So, Anthony, doesn't the media have to say, we got it wrong? Because we heard this in 2003. We got the invasion of Iraq wrong, and they said, never again. It'll never happen again. Well, let's happen again in spades. Go ahead, Anthony.
Well, the media should apologize and say, hey, we're sorry. We've been doing this for the past 2.5 years. We've been saying that the Russians were involved and Trump was involved with the Russians and there was collusion, there was corruption. They should apologize and they should move on to something else. I'm not really sure what they're going to do. Talk about cooking recipes, video games, esports, vaping cigarettes. I'm not really sure. But they can't go down this road, although they're trying to. Now they're trying to say people like Alexander Ovechkin from the winning hockey team visiting the White House is somehow a bad thing because he is a Russian. Now they're devolving into straight xenophobia because their whole programs have been built on Russia this, Russia that. What did they do now? I'm not really sure, but it doesn't look too good right now.
Yeah, Rob, I mean, initially, I watched the initial reactions on, particularly Rachel Maddow and in her orbit there. They're in a state of denial right now. Is it fair to characterize it as denial, Rob?
Yes, look, I've never been a fan of Rachel's show, and I've always wondered if she ever considered the fact that she's never, not only is she never going to convert a Republican to a Democrat, she's going to drive Democrats away from the party because arrogance and condescension are not good attributes to have. But for me, I've always gone to one question I have for everybody, which is, if your child behaved like Donald Trump, would you tolerate it? And I don't see how anybody could say, yes, I'd love my son to go to school and bully everybody and to be an obnoxious jerk. I've never said that Trump colluded. I've always looked at it as more like incompetence. I had dinner with Chris Christie a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about the lack of organization, the incompetence of the Trump administration. And I think that would be my take on it. Do they run an effective, competent White House? Absolutely not. Is there an agenda? No. Are those crimes? Unfortunately not.
Rob, my friend here, but that's a perfect example of a pivot. You don't really want to answer the question here, okay? Is Trump buffoonish? Does he say stupid things? Is he the opposite of eloquence? Yeah, you could say yes to all of those things, okay? But going to Ben right now, but he wasn't a Russian asset, okay?
Right.
That's what this was all about. I get it. Lots of people,
totally different.
A lot of people love and hate Donald Trump, but that's not the point of what this was all about. And if we don't, if we don't confront it, we're going to go through it again.
I agree, and I haven't been accusing him of being a Russian asset.
Okay, but I'm saying,
but
we were mentioning liberal media. Go ahead.
Yes, Maddow.
Go ahead, Ben, jump in.
But it goes all the way back, even before Maddow. Let's go all the way back to where this started, 2016, and BuzzFeed released that dossier from Christopher Steele, which never should have been released in the media. CNN did extensive reporting on it, and it was out of that unsubstantiated piece of political hackery that a lot of these claims came from. Remember, back in 2016, multiple media organizations reported that Donald Trump was a Russian spy, that he was a Russian asset, and that he was working at the behest of Vladimir Putin. And from that, all of this has spawned and kind of rolled downhill. And the problem is that for more than 2 years, so much of the media has gone on air and reported what unnamed sources were telling them, what military sources were telling them, what CIA sources were telling them, and they have humiliated themselves in the process. Jeff Zucker, the head of CNN, just said 2 days ago, not only is he not ashamed of the coverage, but he used these words. He said, "We're not investigators, so how would we know?" Are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me?
Yes, the point of a journalist is to investigate, not to simply regurgitate whatever they're told.
But Jeff Zucker, his understanding of journalism is the op-ed page, because that's the whole station there. Let me go to Anthony. Ben just said that the dossier should have never been published by BuzzFeed, but Jim Comey allowed it to be used in front of a FISA court. I mean, this is the second shoe that has to drop here if we're going to get past all of this, because I'm very angry about all of this. It should have never played out this way, and it's the media's fault that it did, because they could have said, well, if it was good enough for a FISA court, but it's not good enough to be published by that ridiculous website, BuzzFeed, there's something wrong here. Anthony, they never said that. Anthony.
Well, see, the thing about my man earlier talking about incompetence in the White House under Trump right now, there was a lot of incompetence in the White House before and also in the government in general. You're talking about the FBI. I mean, why would you publish a thing like the dossier, which was so obviously false? It was clearly false. You're talking about Russian girls of the night peeing in the bed. I mean, come on, ridiculous stuff. And then you want to wiretap the Trump Tower. For what? And what do you actually get as a result of that? Nothing, not much at all. The media, of course, they're going to play into it because they're trying to make money. They're trying to have these crazy headlines, salacious headlines to generate revenue. A lot of what CNN does, they do simply because it makes them money. They don't really care about really investigating and finding out the truth. They're trying to raise capital. They're trying to get their profile increased. The people that are on prime time, your Don Lemons and whatnot, they don't really care about the reality They care about pushing the narrative and making that cash for the boss, Jeff Zucker.
Rob, at least the first few days after the release of the report, we see a lot of these programs on CNN and NBC going down in ratings. I mean, like 500,000 eyeballs, okay? I mean, are they going to recalibrate? Because if it is all about money, then I guess they're just going to continue down that rabbit hole. But if they want to do that, they really risk their viewership, don't they?
Look, to really give you my column on my Newsmax column is called Centrist Sentiments. And so I take a pretty realistic view of all this. And I think there was so much outrage by especially extreme liberals at how much they hated and despised and loathed Donald Trump that this has snowballed into something so huge. I mean, to accuse him of being a Russian asset and thinking that he was sitting there rubbing his hands together with Vladimir Putin without any proof is fairly outrageous. One of the things I've done, and I've done investigative journalism over the years, is I've spoken to contacts and sources I've had in the CIA and the Pentagon, and this is over the course of all of this in the last 2 years. And I never got anything definitive from them about Trump, which is what always concerned me about, the really intense talk from the Maddows and the Don Lemons about, that he's going to be locked up. I have a friend on Facebook who always used to write, cue the Jaws music, like, that he's about to be eaten by the shark. And I think that they're all embarrassed now. But we do I would like to read the report.
All right, hold that thought. Rob, hold that thought. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Russiagate. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing what happens after Russiagate. Okay, let me go back to Ben in Atlanta. I suppose the litmus test for how the liberal media is going to move forward vis-a-vis the post-Russiagate is that we know that Lindsey Graham at the Senate is going to be leading investigations into what happened in the DOJ and the FBI. The litmus test is the following. Will CNN and MSNBC cover that critically with an open eye and an open mind? Go ahead, Ben.
I don't think they will, and I think the reason they won't.
You're right.
Yeah, they won't because again, remember that everything they have built for the last 2 years plus has been based on this narrative. You mentioned before we went to break this idea that about 500,000 viewers didn't tune in the next night to Rachel Maddow, who had previously watched it the night before because they were in such disappointment. So here's what's really happened, though, and this is what's truly sad about this situation. It's been happening in media for years, is that we are in this vacuum of being validated in the beliefs that we hold. I believe that Trump is a spy, therefore I watch Rachel Maddow because she tells me Trump is a spy. Therefore, I can tell my friends I saw it on TV that Trump is a spy, right? And so it's this cycle that we go through as viewers. And unfortunately, what's happened now is those viewers are at a loss for where to go because they can't get validated. So now you only have to double down if you're Rachel Maddow, Chris Matthews, if you're Don Lemon. You have to double down, and now you have to say, well, maybe Mueller was in on it. Maybe he's part of what's going on. Maybe this whole thing was a trick and it was a setup from Trump from the very beginning. It's controlled opposition. That's now the claim that we're moving toward. And frankly, how do we get away from this to say, can we go back to actually covering the news and what actually is happening? Because, Peter, as you know, there's plenty to talk about that is actually taking place.
Well, let me go to Anthony. There's plenty of things that I would criticize Donald Trump for. I could fill, I could fill a lot of programs with my gripes with the President of the United States. But, Anthony, this is a point of principle. I'm sorry to sound like a Boy Scout here, but you have the DOJ and the FBI and other government agencies politicized and weaponized in influencing a political campaign, the party that's in opposition, at least at the time. I mean, that should really put everybody's hair on fire because it doesn't, the liberal media, what they do is, well, I can't name the source. I mean, covering for these people, covering for unmasking, covering for leaking, okay? This is unconscionable if we're going to have a government that people believe in. Go ahead, Anthony.
Well, see, if people get indicted that the media like, such as maybe your James Comey at this point, maybe to a lesser extent, maybe some other liberal people in there, maybe even a Hillary Clinton, if they were to be implicated in any kind of wrongdoing, the media would not cover it with as much vigor as they did the accusations against Donald Trump. They can't do it because, like Ben said, they've built their whole programming over the past couple of years on this whole Russia narrative, Orange Man bad. That's been their whole thing, so they can't go back on that now. That's going to kill the remaining audience. Rachel Maddow lost about, 500,000 viewers overnight because of the findings of the Mueller report. So if she decides to now shift gears totally and cover those that people who support her like, she's going to just totally lose the whole program altogether. The program will be off the air. She won't be able to make any money. The people that running the show, the advertisers, the executives, they're going to be upset, so they can't switch course now. They got to stay on it, talking about Alexander Ovechkin, talking about anything they can to keep that Russian narrative alive.
You know, Rob, and remember, too, can I just say that there is a lot of... A lot of money to be made, not just in media, but there's a lot of money to be made by think tanks and by these neocon groups who have delighted in the idea of the revival of a Cold War. They have delighted in this idea that Russians were trying to steal our democracy. And so, you know, you have groups like Hamilton 68 and all these nonprofits that have popped up that have received tens of millions of dollars in donations. And it is in their financial and business interest to keep this thing alive. They have to find a way to keep it going. You think they're just going to give up all this money and this revival of the new Cold War? It's not going to happen. You're
spot on, and that's the big worry here. Rob, there's talk that the Attorney General, William Barr, people have mentioned in his orbit, that's been mentioned that there may be a reopening of the investigation into Hillary Clinton. But what that would do is that would look like revenge. I think she should see her day in court. But what we're going to get now is we're going to get this revenge wars, okay? And that doesn't move our political process forward. I think it moves us backwards because I would actually like, and you're a liberal person, you and I have very civil conversations all the time. And I want to get back to that kind of environment here. But we won't get there because there are people that will go out and, you know, there's certainly some people over at Fox, and I think we all know who they are, would love to have this happen again. I'm not sure that would be healthy for the country, all right? Because it's one witch hunt follows another, and then what happens after the next election cycle, it just will perpetuate itself, and then we get to the point where the country is so divided that someone you don't like is automatically your enemy. You can't keep a country together like that. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, yeah, one of the great ironies right now, and this is one reason I'm really happy to be approaching geezerdom. I'm 63 years old. I've lived through a lot. I know history. I lived through history besides still reading about it. We have such inertia in government right now. It's kind of ironic that neither side really talks about policy. They just nya at each other.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need revenge politics. We should be talking about how about infrastructure, how about health care. I mean, Trump saying that the Republicans are the party of health care is like AOC saying the Democrats are the party of guns. And to attack AOC, she's a progressive, then why does she not want to see progress, and why did she boot Amazon out of New York City? My God, the idiocy that goes on. I mean, liberal and progressive means you want to see change, and you're open to change. Yet some of the real extreme liberals are the most intractable, crazy people I've ever encountered. I mean, and furthermore, if you look at history, the Pentagon Papers, I think, were released in 1971. Yep. We were in Vietnam for another 3 years. So there's a process to all of this. So to be predicting Trump's demise was a level of arrogance and hubris and ultimately stupidity, because that's just never happened in the past. I mean, Nixon was wholeheartedly guilty, and he didn't just, get thrown out the window as soon as we had an inkling as to what was going on. John Dean testified against him, and he was still in office a year later.
But, Rob, Watergate had a predicate crime. and it came to fruition through the system. And, but unlike, Rob, unlike Watergate, the CIA and the FBI essentially told the White House, we're not going to get involved in this. We're not going to do your dirty work. But now we did under Obama that they quite willingly did the dirty work of the Democratic Party and the liberal media. And this is what's terrifying here, because if it is allowed to happen, if there's no house cleaning, it will happen again, Ben, in Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely true. And keep in mind, all the crazy conspiracy theorists out there, right, who had warned about a deep state for decades, were all proven correct. That there absolutely was a deep state that worked to subvert this president, that worked to move, and not just in the U.S., by the way. Remember, the dossier, I know I keep talking about this dossier, but it is the root of all of this.
Yes, it is.
Began in the U.K. There was a whole process in the U.K. where it was created there. Christopher Steele in the U.K. It was passed from U.K. services over to the United States, and not even through proper channels, and went directly to John Brennan, who was not supposed to see it in the first place, who then passed it to John McCain, who then shared it with the FBI. I mean, it's just nonsense how this whole thing played out. But the other thing I think is important to remember as we talk about this issue is that the media has put itself in a position right now where they have advocated for this for so long, in part, I believe, because they are so insulated in New York and in LA and in Washington in their own little echo chambers, and they don't think the rest of the country thinks the way that they think. And so they had such vitriol and hatred for President Trump when he got elected. They could not, number one, understand how a buffoon and a fool and a liar could get elected in the first place, because he did not fit what they thought could get there. Polls showed that he shouldn't have won because their polls said that he wouldn't win. And so they could not understand this concept. And so they've also believed that the rest of the country thinks like they do, and was willing to remove him from office without any proof or evidence of anything. One last thing. Hillary Clinton they're not going to go back and investigate her for her email scandal. And the reason they're not, or for misusing servers, is because if you do, then the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who right now is using private email and WhatsApp to conduct official business, would also get implicated, because it's something that they did in the Obama administration, and they're still doing it. So a lot of this bad behavior, even though, again, in the partisan field of which team are you on, we want to say, oh yeah, we'll go get those guys for what they did. It's not going to happen, because this bad behavior runs rampant through both parties.
Yeah, Anthony, Washington is to corruption is fishes to water, unfortunately here. But we have to find a way. Again, we want to stress we have to find a way to start talking to each other again. And I don't know. I'll ask all of you, because we're running out of time here. When will be the time for Trump to pardon some of these individuals? And I'm thinking of Papadopoulos. I'm thinking of Mike Flynn. Maybe clemency for Manafort. Go ahead, Anthony.
Well, I think for Papadopoulos, he could do that as soon as now, really, because he's not in jail anymore. He only did 14 days in the prison. But as far as anybody else that may be in jail for an extended period of time, probably at the end of the second term, because at that point, that's when everybody does all the mass pardonings like Obama, and they can pretty much do whatever, because there's no need to get reelected. And these people, honestly, are just victims of this whole witch hunt. And everybody pretty much knows that at this point. And as we get further along the line in the current term and the second term, we'll see exactly how much they were just victims of the whole thing. So he can pardon them. He can pretty much pardon anybody, maybe even Michael Cohen himself. That might be kind of a stretch.
No. I wouldn't go that far. Okay. I wouldn't go that far. All right, I'm going to give Rob the last 30 seconds. Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I don't know how we could call Paul Manafort a victim. He's pleaded guilty. So has Michael Cohen. I mean, they're bad actors.
But they wouldn't even have been implicated if it were not for the whole thing with Russia.
Trump, let me finish, please. We've got to see a release of the Mueller report before Trump pardons anybody, or there's going to be outrage.
That's fair. That's fair. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in New York, Atlanta, and in Chattanooga. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, Crosstalk rules.